Hey everyone, tonight we slip into a much darker corner of folklore, one where a single melody can undo an entire town. This isn't the cheerful piper of festival parades. This is the man who left Hamelin years ago, only to return with an army of rats and a song sharpened by grief. Betrayed when his sister was condemned as a witch, every note he plays is both requiem and revenge. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy late-night fictional history with a twist. Drop a comment with the time and place you're listening from. It's always amazing to see where everyone is joining in. Now, settle back, let the quiet hum of a fan or night air fill the room, and follow the haunting path of the piper as he leads us through a tale of loss, vengeance, and music that no wall can keep out. You ever remember a song from your past and suddenly it feels like a gut punch? That's me every time I breathe into this pipe. One note, and the kids of Hamelin danced. Another, and the rats swarmed like clockwork shoppers on Black Friday. Don't worry, I'll explain how one musician went from background entertainment at festivals to the guy every parent in town whispers about. But here's the catch. The more you laugh at history's absurdities, the closer you'll see why one melody changed an entire village forever. You probably picture me draped in stripes, leading rats like a marching band gone wrong. Fair enough, that's the version everyone repeats. But once, long before the squeaks, my pipe was nothing but a charm for joy. Think of me less as a pest controller and more like the medieval DJ spinning at every decent gathering. Midsummer nights, harvest feasts, even the odd fasting season when people bent the rules all needed music, and who do you think supplied it? The lute men fumbled, the singers strained, but a pipe cut through chatter the way a ringtone slices through silence, except mine carried laughter instead of irritation. Set the scene. A wide green meadow trampled flat after the hay was hauled away. Torches burning fat and smoky, tossing shadows like restless dancers on barn walls. Long tables stretched end to end, wobbling under salted meat, trenchers of bread, wheels of cheese glossy with rind, and pitchers of ale so thick they looked more like gravy than a drink. Picture the air swollen with roasting goose, herbs hanging dry from beams, horse sweat sticking in nostrils from the ride over. Then, clear above the din, my pipe, bright as a trickling brook, and weaving nonsense that made people's hands clap before they realized it. Children spun around bonfires, skirts flaring like pinwheels snapped by wind. Men thudded mugs against oak so heavy the tables shook loose splinters. Women, stiff all week at looms, broke into dances that rattled the ground harder than cartwheels. Even dogs howled along, tails slapping in rhythm, though at least one goat always spoiled the tempo by bleating a flat note. Festivals back then weren't much different from what you'd recognize now. Imagine one of those massive outdoor music events, crowds spilling against rope lines, everyone sweaty and half drunk by mid-afternoon, but swap the sponsored tents for naked poles and cover charges for a pig roasted on spit. Add a lot more geese, dropping gifts wherever they pleased, and fewer sound checks because who was going to complain? For a while, life tasted only of salt, smoke, and song. But you already know the pattern of old stories. Joy rarely keeps its balance for long. My own laugh faltered the summer my sister was accused of witchcraft. Witchcraft, mind you, for doing the same thing you probably have in a cupboard right now, turning plants into remedies. She could mix chamomile to soften a cough, sage for a sour stomach, a little rosemary tied at the wrist to soothe pounding heads. Today you'd call it herbal medicine and sell it in glass jars at triple the price. There, it was equal parts miracle and menace. People accepted a cure if it worked quietly, but once the wrong person noticed too many recoveries, suspicion grew faster than weeds in spring. If you knew rosemary cured headaches back then, you were either brilliant or in deep trouble. She was the second option. A neighbour's boy got well too quickly. and tongues wagged like loose shutters in a storm. Whispers claimed she consorted with shadows. One judge, eager for display, questioned her under the solemn weight of church bells and fire. My pipe, once carrying tunes to steer dances, couldn't cut through that silence. She was led away, and though no crowd lifted a pitchfork, everyone lowered their eyes with the cowardice that speaks louder than protest. The loss hit like a sudden winter squall, chill, raw, and utterly unfair. When she was gone, the pipe no longer answered the same way. It squealed in notes of grief, broke in ugly wavers when I tried to summon joy. Something in the wood shifted out of spite, or maybe in mourning. I played at feasts afterward, but laughter curdled sharp in my ears. People clapped all the same, yet every cheer cracked with mockery. Each new reel echoed with her absence, like hearing a song stripped of harmony so that only the hollow skeleton remains. Music no longer promised connection. It pressed against loneliness. I carried the pipe not to paint joy but to gnaw wounds, like rubbing a bruise to keep it alive. Every note reminded me that the world loved my sound, but hated her healing. How strange that a melody from carved bone could raise spirits, while a poultice from green stems condemned her. Music, once a festival's heartbeat, became a funeral march remembered by a brother unwilling to forget. Other players brought fiddles or drums. I carried grief curved out of wood. If you wander back through memory with me, you'd smell firewood cracked open, see sparks snapping wild in the black, hear mugs slammed, and bold voices singing half-drunk. And threaded through, faint but constant, the high skirl of a pipe twisting songs out of air. Once that meant dances, matches made, children dizzy from spinning in grass. After her loss, the same sound turned every gathering into mockery festivals held but hollowed. The notes drifted like smoke that stings the eye, leaving you watering and pretending it's joy that makes you weep. That was the hinge where happiness swung toward vengeance. The same pipe that once cheered midsummer became the vessel into which I poured fury slow and heavy. Each tune carved grief deeper until it thickened into resolve. I couldn't reclaim her laughter in the world above, so my playing bent downward, straining for company in the soil beneath the town. And there, in that dark humming with claws and scratching teeth, I began to build companionship, not of people, but of creatures no one else dared to notice. What happens when grief drives a man into company no sane neighbour would choose? In Hamelin, that meant rats. Not a few, not the occasional scavenger slipping through a kitchen door, but an entire society sprawling beneath the streets. You might wrinkle your nose now, but imagine you've just followed me down a forgotten cellar stair, the air close and sour with wet stone, and suddenly the whole place hums with tiny lives moving in the dark. Scratches in timber, the papery rustle of grain sacks ripped from within, the constant squeal of competition. Most people sealed the door and prayed the noise would die down. I opened it wide, carried my pipe, and listened. The first time I found them, I thought I'd stumbled into a breathing floor. The dirt moved with so many bodies it swelled like a tide. The smell met me before the sight grain turned foul at the edges, urine sharp enough to burn, warm fur dampening every corner. My lantern wobbled against the stones, and suddenly 100 eyes glimmered back in angry sparks. Imagine a crowd at a concert turning all at once to glare at you, except the fans stand ankle high, bare their teeth, and have no respect for personal space. Most people would run. I squatted down, pipe in hand, and tried a note. It wasn't much. Just one thin sound creeping out under a dripping ceiling. But the wave of motion slowed, paused, and then carried on, not in panic, not in attack, just in eerie patience. Something in that held me there longer than sense should have allowed. Why comfort myself with vermin? Because unlike the townsfolk, the rats didn't whisper against me or accuse my family of devil's bargains. they answered only to rhythm. Each squeak seemed ready to bend toward melody if I could strike the right key. My grief wanted a listener, and in that warren I found thousands. Picture the light flickering across damp walls. Droplets hung heavy before dropping into pools that stank of mould. In every corner, rats froze mid-motion, whiskers twitching, eyes catching lantern flame. Each speck glowed like a tiny bead, scattered diamonds from broken crowns. To anyone else, this was horror the moment before a squealing swarm rushed forward. To me, it was an audience hushed before applause. When my hand moved along those finger holes, the notes rippled across the swarm, the way wind crosses cut grass. Heads lifted one by one, tails stiffened, bodies lined up instinctively at angles I hadn't commanded. If you squint hard enough, the whole scene looked like an underground club before the lights come up. An illegal fan society humming with anticipation, only every member's ticket was paid in crumbs and gnawed beams. They squeaked in bursts, chattered over each other, harmonized with nothing but hunger. Still, there was devotion buried in that racket. No one booed when I missed a note. Not a single tail stalked off mid-set. If they grew restless, it was not rebellion. It sounded more like clapping out of rhythm, which, let's be honest, every crowd does at least once until a grumpy musician shushes them. In Hamelin above ground, rats meant filth, broken storage, fever running through houses, and teeth picking through shoes at night. Down here they were survivors, balancing chaos with usefulness. They ate what people left, and left what people later blamed on demons, a mirror of ourselves if you think about it. We scraped to patching hunger with whatever coin or crumb we could find. For all the complaints, no one waged full war on them, because to lose a rat was to risk a pile of waste rotting in alleys untouched. Fear and tolerance braided together made them neighbours no one wanted but everyone kept. I started calling them my secret orchestra. No curtain, no fancy hall, just fur and ears tuned too keenly. I played, and instead of applause came the slow grind of wood beams as teeth gnawed louder. A strange approval, but honest. They rewarded every rising trill with order sliding through chaos. Left footpaths cleared, heaps divided neatly, tunnels echoing with echo of song rather than random scratching. My pipe didn't heal sorrows, and it didn't raise the dead, but it bent vermin into shapes of devotion, and tell me that isn't its own sort of miracle. The first time it truly happened, I held one low note and watched as dozens of bodies pulled into a single line, not scattered, not pressing toward food. A line, sharp as soldiers I'd glimpsed in parades. One whistle, and they charged up a tunnel in perfect sequence. Another, and they froze, balancing at the edge of silence. In that moment, power stretched through me like current. Entertainment no longer had limits. Children had laughed at music, drunks had sung with it, but rats obeyed it. The difference was staggering. Every night after, I returned. Some nights I carried bread crusts to keep them near, other nights nothing but sound. The bond thickened, grief melted at its edges, stiffening instead into purpose. If the world denied my sister's wisdom, then I would channel mine through squeaks and shrills until the whole town noticed. I played until my lips numbed, hands aching, but still the eyes stayed fixed, still the tails quivered when the octave changed. Solitude had found company thick as shadows. Outcasts listening to an outcast. There beneath Hamelin, I felt less abandoned. Above, the streets muttered of demons stealing joy. Below, I found music that answered back. And with that came the first seeds of an idea. What might happen if this hidden orchestra spilled into daylight? What if one night, while the town lay safe in thoughtless slumber, my audience filled the streets like dancers in a festival no one asked for? That thought carried me upward, pipe in hand, planning rehearsals no neighbour would ever glimpse. Imagine walking into a street at midnight and finding 1,000 rats marching in formation. Their paws patter in sync, eyes all glowing under the moon, tails drawing lines like cursive on the cobblestones. No banners wave, no trumpets sound, just the faint whine of a pipe shaping every twitch and step. Most townsfolk huddled warm in their beds never saw it, but if they had opened a shutter, they would have thought the world tipped over into madness. For me, it was rehearsal. Practice for something that would stretch far beyond midnight alleys and spilled grain. It started small, a handful at first. I crept into empty lanes when the bells rang for night curfew. The houses darkened and the air filled with that sleepy silence between prayers and roosters. I pressed the pipe to my lips, coaxing the same playful notes that once carried dancers. Instead of boys and girls in circles, rats lined up single file, their tiny claw clicks echoing like beads dropped on stone. To test them, I turned corners sharply, dragged my heels, quickened the tune. Each time, the rodents shifted in a wriggling river, bending to hold the shape. The power of it thrilled and unsettled me all at once. There were near misses, too. One rat leapt onto a pot lid left outside a tavern, the clang rattling louder than a church bell. My heart seized. A drunk man staggered nearby, squinting into the dark. He muttered curses about thieves or devils and wandered off, leaving me pressed flat to the shadows, hardly breathing while the rats froze in unnatural stillness. Another night, a woman carrying out slops stopped dead as a tail brushed her sandaled foot. She gasped, spilling the bucket. In the faint light, she caught only a scurry of shapes. The music cut quick, my pipe stilled, the horde vanishing into drains as if swallowed by earth itself. If she suspected the truth, she told no one. Perhaps she thought it another nightmare brought by bad ale. The whole performance felt oddly modern, like rehearsing a flash mob in a city square. Only rather than dancers leaping into choreographed smiles, these performers had sharp teeth, twitching whiskers, and no respect for human ankles. A single note replaced cue cards. A sharp trill folded the group around obstacles. A sinking tone brought silence. The absurdity struck me even as I played. All this trouble for what? A rodent parade down crooked medieval streets. Yet I couldn't stop. Each night added confidence like a musician learning not just songs, but crowds themselves. The sound was haunting in its own way. Paw beats tapped steady like drops of rain striking cobblestone, scratchy and soft yet multiplied until the rhythm built, unstoppable. The mass of fur surged and curled on command, swirling through alleys like water running downhill. When I cut the note short, the entire wave hushed. Imagine kneeling above, watching thousands of bodies freeze in synchrony. The silence so deep you hear the trickle of a gutter 10 houses off. Then, with one squeak from the pipe, they rush again, flowing faster than spilled oil. From rooftops, it might have looked like shadows splitting and rejoining, a living cloak being pulled across the streets. And believe me, someone noticed. Just not the people I feared. The cats. Every feline in town seemed to sense retirement was drawing near. Sleek hunters, once proud of their nightly conquests, now stared wide-eyed at what no paw could chase back. One or two tried a leap at the edge of the horde, only to recoil when dozens of teeth turned on them at once. Before long, the cats didn't even bother. They slunk away early each evening, curling behind ovens or under wagons, eyes glowing with offended dignity. If you measured their complaints, you'd say half the feline population suddenly demanded pensions. The rehearsals carved trust between us. Each pattern we perfected, each alley drilled like a secret corridor of discipline, tightened the bond. I began whistling patterns not written in any song, and they obeyed as if the melody burned into muscle. I felt them testing me too. When a note cracked or wavered, the rats hesitated, waiting for strength, almost questioning the command. My grief no longer sagged heavy. it sharpened into intent. They had no judgment, no spite. They only held up a mirror to my will, and I filled it night after night, until I no longer doubted what the pipe could demand. Soon, rumours began drifting across the marketplace. Shop doors bolted tighter at night. Bakers complained their fresh loaves crawled off faster than delivery boys. Sleepers woke to faint scratches outside windows. And strangest of all, faint threads of music carried thin on night air, low half notes no one could trace to their source. Each whisper added weight. People muttered about demons practicing for a feast, about lost souls still dancing. None guessed a piper calling down troops 2 inches tall. But suspicion breathes quickly here, old as the soil itself. By then the thrill of command urged me further, not just out of grief but into rebellion. The town took my sister's laughter. The town called it witchcraft. Now the town lay restless under its own roof, uneasy with echoes it couldn't banish. I held the power to make them hear what they refused to understand, and the secret rehearsals had prepared me. My fingers tightened on the holes of that pipe, knowing the next performance would not hide. Not in an alley, not in drains, not behind shadows. It would stand plain beneath the moon, and every note would weigh justice against revenge. Every story of rebellion carries a single hinge point. For me, that hinge was silence, a sharp breath in the middle of a night when the town lay heavy with sleep. I stood on Hamelin's cobblestones, slick and blackened under a pale moon. The stones cooled through my thin shoes, dew thickening the air with that smell halfway between wet hay and chimney smoke. I steadied my hand on the pipe, wood smooth as worn bone, the holes resting beneath fingers that trembled not from cold but from weight. Before a single note, there was quiet, and quiet always asks a question. Are you willing to turn the stillness into something no one can take back? I thought of her then, my sister with rosemary tucked into her apron. She never had the chance to hold such a question because the town answered for her. Medieval justice, if you can call it justice, had a funny way of snapping onto the weakest necks. The poor carried laws like stones on their backs, while those with influence strolled unmarked, fat and smug from feasts. It was clear then, as it is now. If you owned property or sat behind sturdy walls, punishment glanced past you like rain sliding off stone. If you carried herbs or sang the wrong melody, suspicion landed like an axe. So I stood under the quiet, pipe cooling against my lips, remembering how she was lost while the mayor dined comfortably, believing he would dine comfortably forever. Up beyond the streets, his manor towered above the half-rotted houses. Its shutters were pulled tight, torches flickering behind them, spilling faint orange into the damp night air. Inside, wealth sat at the table, salt thick on meats, spice jars open just to boast they could, a wool cloak draped on a chair to warm him even in summer. Outside, the rest dragged themselves through days that never belonged to them, hands blistered from fields no man could escape, ears bent low to insults from those who claimed piety but traded blessings for coin. The gap gaped open, plain as that silver thread of moon between rooftops. Everyone saw it, everyone knew, nobody said. If you need a translation to today, imagine the mayor like the corporate boss who keeps announcing budget cuts while slicing into another roast during a boardroom feast. Same polished smile, same crumbs tumbling into his beard as he declares austerity. The difference is that back then you couldn't submit a complaint email or unionize. You swallowed each betrayal with hard bread and thin ale, too tired to lift your head, too cautious to question. And me? I had no seat at his table, only the pipe and every hollow that grief carved into me. Standing there, I wondered whether one tune could tip the balance louder than complaints whispered in kitchens. His fear was already building, though he would never admit it. Anything that shook his grasp caught him off guard, because command thrives on control. Rats unsettled him most, not because they ruined grain, but because they disregarded hierarchy. You couldn't order a rat, couldn't tax a rat, couldn't point and make it kneel. When word reached that some unseen force bent rats into patterns, his bones rattled like the windows in his hall. The mayor's fear grew faster than rumours on Twitter, minus the hashtags, but with double the panic. Each squeak in the night crept under his blankets louder than the church bells. And yet, what he feared most wasn't really the rats themselves. It was the possibility that others in Hamelin, cracked by endless work, might start to hear justice in those squeals, and find courage in music that wasn't authorized by the pulpit or the square. Power never dreads animals. It dreads the thought of people seeing power shift. What if farmhands stumbled from barns and saw rats moving as soldiers, their paws drumming out defiance against cobblestones? The mayor's authority wasn't built from iron or talent. It hung by silence. If silence broke, whether through crowd shout, song, or 1,000 tiny claws, his rule collapsed to ash. So I stood in the dark and realized vengeance was no longer private. My pipe didn't belong to grief alone. It had turned into theatre, a stage shaped by alleys and moonlight, music written not in ink but in shrieks of wood and squeals of tail. It was civic as much as personal. Rebellion passed through reed and breath. If anyone peered from a window, they would see art they couldn't press down or dismiss. Rats as chorus, pipe as script, grief as actor. The show prepared itself. And all that needed beginning was the first note. The thought cut through me sharper than any blade. Every corner of Hamelin, each silent sleeper, would wake to questions they couldn't smother. Who controls the song? Who shakes the walls? Was a mayor worth more respect than the man he orphaned and silenced? On that night, under that white moon that seemed to watch too closely, even authority felt brittle. Suddenly one instrument in one hand carried more weight than all the coins sprawled behind the mayor's shutters. What's the hold of power when squeaks drown your prayers? When shadows writhe under command from a pipe? The mayor remained behind walls, but walls don't keep out melodies. They bend them, echo them louder sometimes. My breath touched the reed, the vibration trembled through the holes, and I felt the story pushing itself forward. He was vulnerable, though he would laugh it off over venison. He was mocked, though he would not hear the laughter. The rats carried my defiance, snipping apart his pride as easily as fabric unravelling thread by thread. So there in silence, I chose music. Rebellion without banners, a storm without clouds. The pipe cooled once more against my lips before I drew the note that would send Hamelin into a night where comedy bled into dread, and the streets filled with a parade nobody had the sense to invite. At last, Hamelin woke to music unlike any festival they had known. Not the kind of tune that made feet dance easy or mugs slam cheerfully against oak, but a rhythm that carried weight, sharp as thunder about to break. One whistle cut the stillness, and at first it might have sounded like any faint song drifting up from a tavern. But then the ground began to shift. Rats burst from drains and cellars, flooding outward like water forced against dam gates finally split open. Their claws clattered on stones, a noise like knives brushing each other in quick succession. The air filled with squeals, high and shrill, stitched tight to the piping that never paused. A tide spread through the town, and with each turn of the melody, the mass bent as one body. For most, the first sight came with disbelief. Sleep-heavy eyes blinked open, shutters swung inward, and villagers thought at first they dreamed. But disbelief passes quick when shadows writhe into shape, when tales whip in lines across narrow lanes. The first wave caught bakers on their way to ovens, flour still dusted on their arms. They froze behind counters as claws poured over their floors. Their loaves vanished faster than coins in a gambling hall. Priests clutching prayer books hurried to splash holy water, waving it about like expired coupons desperate for another use. They shouted verses, but the rats didn't flinch. Children at first laughed high giggles at a furry parade twisting too funny to be feared, but laughter stalled when the swarm thickened, pressing against their ankles, the music rising in command. In minutes, a street that once smelled like bread and ash turned into shifting fur and noise sharper than any sermon. The panic built. Some bolted like shoppers when a Black Friday door crashes open. Elbows flew, baskets toppled. People stumbled into muck and kept running. Barrels overturned, pigs squealed, doors slammed faster than thunder. Fields of goose feathers erupted when a merchant's bedding cart split apart, the air choking with floating down as rats scattered through it like sparks. Every lane turned frantic, yet the pipe played steady and cold, never stuttering once. The melody pinned chaos in order and disorder in rhythm. From above, it might have looked comical if it weren't so relentless. Imagine the first day of school, but all the students carried tails, didn't wait for roll call, and ignored every rule. The rats swerved through alleys, crowded the steps of chapels, skittered across carts and roofs. And still they moved in patterns, spirals, lines, pauses, and each pause carried silence far heavier than words. It wasn't just beasts loose, it was a performance written on flesh and claw. If the town was an orchestra hall, the pipe was its conductor, and pride itself shrank in the mayor's chest with every new formation. His pride unravelled note by note, each sound tugging another thread from his dignity, shredding him easy as a cheap tunic dragged through rain until the seams dissolved into pulp. He tried bluster first, barking orders from his window as guards struggled into armour half-buckled. Their lances struck the air uselessly, gleaming but never touching a rat. The swarm moved around them like water bending around a rock. The guards panicked the fastest. They stumbled. Shields dropped, helmets clattered, and in the next breath they sprinted quicker than townsfolk who had no armour at all. The mayor leaned forward, red-faced and furious, shouting over the sound, but all anyone witnessed was his authority cut down not by sword, but by squeaks echoing louder than his voice. The spectacle balanced between comedy and menace, never settling as one. There was something ridiculous in the sight of a baker flapping his apron to stop 1,000 intruders, or a priest holding his book above the tide like it might stay dry. Yet each giggle turned nervous, the longer claws scraped, the sharper tails lashed across stone. Every moment carried humour pressed too close to fear until no one knew whether to laugh or shiver. The music throbbed on, guiding, twisting, choking the town into a theatre of absurd terror. Buildings shuddered under the weight of tiny feet. Windows banged open and slammed shut. Rats spilled everywhere, as if the earth itself cracked open to free them. That night, the town learned something its leaders never taught. Sorrow pressed too long doesn't stay hidden, it spills. One man's grief, carried through wood and breath, can shake more power than decrees shouted from a dais. My pipe, heavy with the memory of my sister, became the lever that tilted pride to rubble. No edict could stop it, no wall kept it out. Each note carried a wound at its root, and wounds cut deeper when dressed as a song. Hamelin saw me then, not as the player who made their midsummer dances light, but as the force that could bend shadows into soldiers. Their eyes held fear, but also something deeper, something their lips dared not name. Perhaps awe, perhaps the recognition that music need not soothe. Whatever it was, the night sealed itself into memory, impossible to forget. The cobblestones knew every paw-beat, and the air clung to the piping long after the last squeak faded under moonlight. And here the story blurs. Ask a villager later, and they'll twist truth with trembling hands. Some claim the streets fell quiet as if nothing had happened, that dawn swept it all away like breath on glass. Others swear the swarm lingered deep into morning, a nightmare bleeding too slow from waking hours. Whatever the account, what happened after slips into whispers, half-told tales softened with time. Records refused to agree, and mouths refused to open. All I know, a melody rose, pulled sorrow into form and proved that grief can march louder than authority dares to imagine. What follows drifts in shadow, uncertain, perhaps unspeakable, yet never lost. Did the children really disappear, or did history just erase what was too strange to explain? That's the riddle people whisper every time my name comes up. Town records grow thin right after, more silence than story. Like the clerks themselves didn't dare set quill to parchment. Hamelin pretends time moved forward neat and tidy. But deep in the gaps, the ending bends three ways, none more certain than a rumour you almost believe. Some say the whole thing was no darker than a parade of mischief. Picture it. Children skipping outside town gates, cheeks bright, feet stomping to playful notes, the kind that once spun their parents dizzy around bonfire circles. The song carried, pulling them through fields warmed by summer night air, down toward a valley where grass bent heavy with dew. The children linked hands, laughed, and wandered farther than usual. Maybe they tumbled to sleep under a cluster of trees, shoes muddied, hair tangled with weeds, a festival without torches or tables. They returned yawning at dawn, their parents furious and relieved, but no harm done beyond scolding and stories. This thread gives me the gentlest place in memory, little more than a trickster turning midnight into a late bedtime story. But another whisper grows heavier, that once the music shifted, the laughter fell quiet, and those children drifted beyond sight. They walked clear out of Hamelin, into shades too thick for torches, steps light as though dream-led, faces carrying a calm so eerie no parent dared follow. By sunrise, fields stood empty, not even footprints pressed into wet grass. Imagine it rows of beds still crumpled with warmth, spoons half polished on tables, homes shaking with silence sharper than any cry. It wasn't a departure the way geese fly low overhead, promising to return come spring. It was an erasure. Entire voices gone in a night, cut out of memory with a blade clean as frost. Then there's the story I want to believe, maybe more than any other. That as the song rose bitter and ragged, I caught one child's eyes holding mine steady through the dark. Face round, maybe no older than 8 years, courage sparking despite the fear straining every hand around him. He stepped forward once, tugging at my sleeve, no plea spoken yet deeper than a prayer could manage, and something wavered in me. Not the grief, not the rage, but the edge that decides whether sorrow swallows or transforms. The note stalled, hovered, blurred. For a heartbeat, revenge melted into compassion, and I played a tune softer, almost a lullaby. Children dropped into calm, breathing easy. The rats eased back, and dawn crept over roofs without another cry. That version isn't dramatic enough for chroniclers, but you and I both know. The smallest interruption sometimes changes an entire story. Each path pulls history its own way. One makes me no more than a mischievous entertainer, the other loads my pipe with shadows too heavy to shrug off, and the third leaves an opening for mercy that no scroll records. Which one happened? I won't answer that directly. Legends stay alive because they never tie their own shoelaces too tight. Give a story closure, and it stiffens like clay baked too long in the kiln. Leave a crack, and air rushes through for centuries. The truth hides in softer things. Villagers claimed the streets fell silent once the music dimmed, not a squeak left to slice the air. Yet pawprints pressed into soft earth stayed for days, leading nowhere in particular, spelling no message, just scattered hints that the night left more behind than silence. Moonlit lanes where children once dashed past bakery doors now seemed to listen to themselves, as if sound itself grew cautious. Imagine walking there the morning after bare stone glowing pale, the smell of smoke hanging thin, and no laughter bubbling from alleys you once hated for being too loud. Even the wind seemed reluctant, brushing rooftops so carefully you wondered if walls could break at a sigh. Now, a pause before this turns too heavy, because yes, it is grim to picture whole families hushed in grief, But also, you know a town's in trouble when its only rat control policy is a flute player with a grudge. Picture officials sitting around planning, should we invest in better granaries? Or maybe just trust the guy in striped clothes who hangs out with vermin after midnight? No committee meeting has aged so poorly. If you need a laugh, imagine posting that job listing today. Wanted, musician, must enjoy rodents, payment uncertain, hazard levels catastrophic. Still, it's the mystery more than the comedy that keeps people telling it over and over. History often papers over uncomfortable endings like deleted browser tabs, best not spoken of, but you still wonder what vanished there. We like cancellation more than contradiction, and yet the things we scrub away keep rising. People gather around fires or bedsides or screens and whisper, maybe the children danced, maybe they vanished, maybe they stopped a man from losing himself completely. And the whisper carries on not because anyone knows, but because no one does, and we're wired to chase gaps harder than answers. In the end, the choice is yours. Do you hear vengeance in the piping justice sharpened by sorrow that never quieted? Do you hear compassion in the softer tune, suggesting even grief can pause when met with bravery from a child? Or do you hear something in between, a melody so tangled it refuses to choose just one? The strength of this story lies not in its certainty, but in its refusal to settle. Maybe that's why the piper lingers long after Hamelin's walls crumbled and rotted timbers gave way. He is part nightmare, part half-smile anecdote, part mirror held to choices we recognize too well. Centuries will pass, but the image sticks. A tune played, children stepping forward, rats scurrying shapes into night. None fixed, none forgotten. The ambiguity itself becomes the memory, and that's why you still lean forward, curious to hear the next breath of the pipe. The question never closes. It only waits in the quiet. And when Hamelin's legend slips off the page, the cadence softens. Streets dark, rooftops hushed, a moon holding its pale face steady. Some stories end with triumph, some with ruin. This one ends with air held between notes, an unfinished song that lingers even when the pipe falls silent. Legends have strange endurance, not because they hand us clear truths, but because they wrap them in jokes, grief, and gaps big enough for questions. The piper lingers because no one agrees where his tune finally ended. That ambiguity keeps him walking beside us, carrying echoes of choices we also face when anger strains toward revenge, when fairness feels impossible, when silence weighs heavier than words. Stories like this matter because they reflect us back in crooked mirrors. So if the pipe rested in your hands, what melody would rise? Come back next time and imagine another tune.